day my father died, I thought the hardest part was over. I sat in the front row of the funeral home, my mother's hand clutched in mine, watching strangers file past his casket and murmur empty condolences. My brother sat on the other side of her, his face a mask of grief that I now know was rehearsed. My uncle stood at the back, speaking in hushed tones with men in expensive suits, men I didn't recognize but would come to know intimately in the months ahead. I thought we were all united in loss. I thought family meant something. I was wrong about all of it. My name is Elena Vance, and my father, Arthur Vance, built an empire from nothing. He started with a single food truck, a beat-up vehicle he bought with money borrowed from his mother, and turned it into Vance Foods, a distribution company worth over $200 million. He was the kind of man who remembered every employee's name, who paid for his workers' children to go to college, who still drove a 10-year-old truck because he couldn't justify spending money on himself. He built the business for us, his family. He told me that 100 times. This is for you and your brother, Elena. This is your legacy. I believed him. I dedicated my life to that belief. I joined the company right out of college, starting in the warehouse, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. My father insisted on it. You can't lead people if you don't understand what they do, he would say. So I loaded trucks and took inventory and worked the night shift alongside people who had no idea I was the boss's daughter. I earned their respect the hard way. By the time I was 30, I was his chief operating officer, the person he trusted most to carry on his vision. My brother, Daniel, took a different path. He joined the company around the same time, but he started in the executive suite, in a fancy office with a view, learning the business side from our Uncle Marcus. Uncle Marcus was my father's younger brother, the one who had been there from the beginning, the one my father trusted above everyone except maybe my mother. He was the CFO, the financial wizard, the man who handled the money while my father handled everything else. They were a team, the two brothers who built something extraordinary together. I grew up calling him Uncle Mark, spending holidays at his house, playing with his kids. He was family. I trusted him completely. When my father's heart attack came, sudden and massive, it felt like the world had ended. He was 62, still healthy, still working 12-hour days, still planning for the future. He died in his office at his desk, doing what he loved. I found him there, slumped over spreadsheets that showed the company was thriving. It was the worst moment of my life. It was also the moment my uncle began his slow, methodical betrayal. The funeral was a blur. People spoke, people cried, people hugged me and told me how sorry they were. My uncle gave a eulogy that made half the room weep, talking about his brother, his partner, his best friend. My brother sat beside me, silent and still, his eyes dry. I thought he was just strong, holding it together for the rest of us. I didn't know he was already part of the plan. The reading of the will happened 3 days later, in my father's lawyer's office. It was a small gathering. My mother, my brother, my uncle, and me. The lawyer, a gray man named Mr. Harrison who had served my father for 40 years, read the document in a monotone that felt disrespectful to the weight of the words. My father had left the business to the 3 of us, my mother, my brother, and me, in equal shares. My uncle was named executor and trustee, tasked with managing the transition and protecting the company until we were ready to lead. It seemed reasonable. It seemed right. I didn't question it. I didn't question anything. The first sign of trouble came 6 months later. I was reviewing financial statements, preparing for a board meeting when I noticed something strange. A series of transactions I didn't recognize, payments to vendors I had never heard of. I asked my uncle about them. He smiled, patted my shoulder, and explained they were consulting fees, necessary expenses for the transition, nothing to worry about. I trusted him. He was family. Why wouldn't I? The second sign came 3 months after that. A long-time supplier called me, confused about a contract that had been canceled. I hadn't canceled it. I checked the files, and there it was, a termination notice with my electronic signature. A signature I had never authorized. I went to my uncle again, this time with more questions, more suspicion. He was less patient this time. "Elena, you're under a lot of stress," he said. "Grief does strange things to people. Maybe you're not ready for this level of responsibility. Maybe you should take some time off." I refused. I told him I was fine. I told him I would get to the bottom of it. He smiled that same smile, but his eyes were different now. Colder, harder. I should have seen it then. I didn't. The bomb dropped a year after my father's death. I arrived at work to find my keycard didn't work. My office door was locked. My files were gone. My uncle's assistant handed me a letter, thick with legal documents, and told me I needed to leave the premises immediately. The letter informed me that I had been removed from my position, that my shares were being held in trust, pending an investigation into financial irregularities in my department, and that I was prohibited from accessing company property or data until further notice. I stood in the lobby of the building my father had built, staring at words that made no sense, and felt the ground open beneath my feet. I called my brother. He didn't answer. I called my mother. She was crying, confused, terrified. She told me my uncle had visited her, explained that I had been making mistakes, that the company was in danger, that it was better for everyone if I stepped away quietly. She didn't believe him, she said, but she didn't know what to do. I called a lawyer. He cost me my last savings. He told me the truth. My uncle had spent the past year systematically dismantling my position, building a case against me, fabricating evidence of incompetence and fraud. He had my brother's support, my brother's signature on documents that sealed my fate. He had the board, stacked with his allies, people my father had trusted but who now belonged to my uncle. I had nothing. No job, no money, no future in the company I had given my life to. I was 34 years old, and everything I had worked for was gone. I spent the next 2 years in a fog of grief and rage. I sued. I lost. I appealed. I lost again. The legal system moved slowly and expensively, and my uncle had deeper pockets and better lawyers. He bled me dry, forced me into bankruptcy, watched from a distance as I lost my apartment, my car, my dignity. My brother stopped taking my calls. My mother, caught between her children, withdrew into silence and depression. My uncle's children, my cousins, blocked me on social media, erased me from their lives. I was alone, broke, and broken. The only thing that kept me alive was the memory of my father's voice, telling me that I was strong, that I was capable, that I would carry on his legacy. I clung to that voice like a lifeline in a stormy sea. Then one night I got a call. A woman's voice, unfamiliar, hesitant. She said her name was Sarah, and she used to work for my uncle. She said she had seen things, documents, evidence that would prove everything. She said she was scared, that she didn't know who else to turn to, that she had heard about my case and wanted to help. I didn't trust her. I didn't trust anyone, but I had nothing left to lose. I agreed to meet her at a diner outside the city, a neutral place where we could talk without being seen. She showed up looking terrified, glancing over her shoulder, clutching a folder to her chest like it contained her last hope. It did. Inside that folder were copies of emails, financial records, and internal memos that proved everything. My uncle had been stealing from the company for years, long before my father died. He had created fake vendors, siphoned money into offshore accounts, manipulated the books to hide his tracks. When my father started asking questions, started getting suspicious, my uncle panicked. But my father died before he could act, and my uncle saw his opportunity. He framed me to protect himself, using my brother as a pawn, playing on his greed and resentment. The evidence was damning, undeniable, complete. I looked at Sarah across the sticky diner table, tears streaming down my face, and asked the only question that mattered. "Why are you helping me?" She looked down at her hands, then back at me, and said something I will never forget. "Because your father gave my mother a job when no one else would. Because he paid for my college education. Because he was a good man, and I watched his brother destroy everything he built. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to stop it." That night, I made a vow. Not for revenge, not for justice, for my father, for his legacy, for the man who believed in me when no one else did. I would take back what was his, I would expose the truth, and I would make my uncle and my brother answer for what they had done. The hunt was on, and this time I would not lose. Sarah's folder was a treasure trove, but it was also a weapon I didn't yet know how to wield. I spent the next 3 months studying every document, every email, every financial record she had given me. I cross-referenced them with public records, with old company reports I had saved, with memories of conversations I had dismissed at the time. Piece by piece, the full picture emerged. My Uncle Marcus hadn't just been stealing from the company. He had been systematically looting it for over a decade. He had created a network of fake vendors, shell companies registered in Delaware and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, all designed to funnel millions into his personal accounts. He had manipulated inventory counts, padded payroll with ghost employees, and falsified tax returns. My father, trusting and focused on the big picture, had never looked closely enough. He assumed his brother was honest. He assumed family meant something. He was wrong about both. My brother Daniel's role was smaller but more painful. He hadn't been in on the original scheme, but when my uncle approached him after our father's death, offering him a share of the proceeds in exchange for his silence and cooperation, he had accepted without hesitation. The emails Sarah provided showed their negotiations, their discussions of how to frame me, their cold calculations of how much they could steal before anyone noticed. My brother, my only sibling, the boy I had protected from bullies and helped with homework, had sold me out for money. That knowledge hurt more than anything my uncle had done. I had the evidence, but evidence alone wasn't enough. My uncle had money, power, and a team of lawyers who had already beaten me twice. I needed a different approach. I needed to be smarter, more patient, more strategic than they expected. I needed to become the person my father always believed I could be. I started small, rebuilding my life while I planned my attack. I took a job at a small accounting firm, work that was beneath my skills but paid the bills and gave me access to resources I needed. I rented a tiny apartment, furnished it with thrift store finds, and lived on rice and beans while I saved every penny for what was coming. My mother visited sometimes, guilt and love warring on her face. She had chosen neutrality in the family war, too afraid to take sides, too broken to fight. I didn't blame her. I couldn't. She had lost her husband, and now she was losing her children. I just hoped that one day she would understand why I had to do what I was about to do. The first phase of my plan was information. I used my accounting skills to dig deeper into my uncle's current operations, following the trails Sarah had opened. I discovered that he had grown bolder since forcing me out, siphoning even more money, taking even greater risks. He had also made enemies, people he had cheated, partners he had betrayed. I found them, one by one, and I reached out. Not as Elena Vance, the disgraced niece, but as an anonymous source with information about Marcus's crimes. I fed them documents, tips, evidence they could use. I watched from a distance as lawsuits piled up, as investigations opened, as his carefully constructed empire began to show cracks. The second phase was my brother. I didn't want to destroy him, not entirely. He was weak, not evil, and somewhere beneath the greed was the boy I had once loved. I reached out to him through a mutual friend, asking for a meeting, promising nothing but a conversation. He agreed reluctantly, and we met at a coffee shop far from anyone who might recognize us. He looked older, tired, haunted by something he couldn't name. I didn't attack him. I didn't accuse him. I just showed him the emails, the evidence of his complicity, and I told him the truth. I'm not here to hurt you, Daniel. I'm here to give you a choice. You can keep living with what you've done, knowing that one day it will all come out and you'll lose everything. Or you can help me stop him and I'll make sure you walk away with enough to start over. Not rich, not comfortable, just enough. He cried. He begged for forgiveness. He told me he was sorry, that he had been scared, that our uncle had manipulated him. I believed him, or I wanted to. Either way, he agreed to help. The third phase was the public. I had learned from my first legal battle that fighting in court was slow, expensive, and unpredictable. My uncle could outspend me, outlast me, outmaneuver me, but he couldn't outrun public opinion. He couldn't hide from the truth once it was exposed to the light. I worked with a journalist I trusted, a woman named Rebecca who had covered white-collar crime for decades. I gave her the full story, the documents, the timeline, the human cost. She spent 6 months investigating, verifying, building a case that would stand up to any scrutiny. When she finally published her article, it was front-page news. The legacy of greed, how a trusted uncle stole his brother's empire and framed his niece. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Investors pulled out. Partners distanced themselves. The board, finally seeing the truth, launched their own investigation and suspended my uncle pending the results. My brother, acting on my instructions, went to the authorities with his testimony, his evidence, his confession. He wasn't forgiven, not by me, not by anyone, but he was useful. My uncle fought, of course. He hired new lawyers, gave interviews, tried to spin the story as a family dispute blown out of proportion. But the evidence was too strong, the witnesses too credible, the public outrage too intense. Within a year, he was indicted on federal charges of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. He faced decades in prison, the destruction of everything he had built, the loss of his family, his reputation, his freedom. I watched his perp walk on television, the same man who had smiled at my father's funeral while planning my destruction, now reduced to a gray figure in handcuffs. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no triumph, just a quiet, weary peace. The company was in ruins, of course. Years of theft and mismanagement had taken their toll. Clients had left, employees had been laid off, the brand my father had built was damaged almost beyond repair. The board, desperate to salvage something, approached me about returning as CEO. They offered me a salary, a title, a chance to rebuild. I turned them down, not because I didn't want it, but because I knew I couldn't do it alone. I made a counteroffer. I would return, but only if the employees who had been laid off were rehired, only if the company's profits were shared with the workers who had made it possible, only if my father's vision of a business that cared for its people was restored. They agreed. They had no choice. I've been back for 3 years now. The company is smaller than it was, but it's healthier, more honest, more aligned with my father's values. We've rebuilt trust with our clients, our suppliers, our community. We've created a foundation in my father's name that provides scholarships and support for employees and their families. My brother is out of prison now, living in another state, working a job that pays minimum wage, rebuilding his life one day at a time. He calls me on my birthday, and I answer. We don't talk about the past. We don't need to. My mother and I have found our way back to each other, slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust after a long war. She lives with me now, helping around the house, gardening in the backyard, finding joy in small things. My uncle is still in prison with years left on his sentence. I don't visit. I don't write. I don't think about him if I can help it. The legacy my father built was almost destroyed by greed and betrayal. But in the end, it survived. Not because of the money or the buildings or the contracts. Because of the people who believed in him, who remembered his kindness, who stepped forward when it mattered most. Sarah, the woman who risked everything to give me that folder. Rebecca, the journalist who told the truth when it was dangerous to do so. The employees who welcomed me back, who trusted me despite everything. My brother, weak and flawed, who finally found the courage to do the right thing. And me, the daughter who refused to give up, who kept fighting when everyone told her to quit, who believed in her father's legacy even when it seemed lost forever. That is the legacy she built. Not a company, not a fortune. A family of people who choose each other, who fight for each other, who remember that the only thing worth building is something that outlasts you. I am my father's daughter, and his legacy is in good hands.